Hi, my name is Jeff Vlaming, and you're listening to the TV Writer Podcast.
So I want to tell you a little bit about our main sponsor for the episode. Script Anatomy is a screenwriting school that gets incredible results. In just 4 years, their students have won 58 fellowships, half of them at major studios. In 2020 alone, Script Anatomy won 4 out of 11 fellowships at CBS and 3 out of 8 at Warner Brothers. Why? Because the instructors are all working writers with current credits. They teach a consistent, tool-based program, and they treat students like emerging professionals. To get your writing career started, go to scriptanatomy.com. My name is Gray Jones, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 118 for November 1st, 2021. Well, today I have the pleasure of bringing you an interview with veteran writer, executive producer, and instructor, Jeff Vlaming. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Gray.
And you have a really impressive list of credits, which we will get to later on the podcast, but I think that your journey through the industry is going to be of particular interest to the viewers of this show. And I want to go right back to the beginning, because I think there's a lot of people who are not in Hollywood, and they write to the podcast, you hear them at panels, and there's all these questions about, can I start outside of Hollywood and be a successful TV writer? At what point do I move? And all of those things. So tell me sort of where it all began.
Well, I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And interestingly enough, when I was a kid, I drew all the time. I thought I was going to be a cartoonist or an animator. I'd done a bunch of films in high school, like Super 8 films, long before video. And so we would script things like that. But it was mostly like, what's the coolest shot we can get? How do we get the killer upstairs before the other person finds out? I mean, it's all terrible Super 8 stuff. But
yeah.
So I went to college, actually went into theater at the University of Minnesota. And my Acting 101 class was taught by this Chicago actor. And his name was William H. Macy.
Oh, wow.
And so the class had a book that was, scenes for 2 actors, a man and a woman, scenes for 2 men, scenes for 2 women, all that stuff. And throughout the whole year, we would do exercises from that. We perform scenes for that for the class. And then it was finally the last thing for the class nearing the end. And I performed my scene with my partner, and Bill Macy, you went by Bill, said, well, that was very good after we had finished. That was very good. I'm not familiar with that scene, though. And I said, well, it's because it's not from the book. It's because I wrote it, because I thought I'm just going to write a scene, rather than going through all these things. And he's like, oh, interesting. Well, he gave me some pointers, and we refined it and everything. And it was like, good for me, And it wasn't until the end of the semester when we had the teacher conference thing with, and I'm sitting in a room with Bill, and he goes, have you ever considered writing a whole play? And I had not. I mean, I'd written these, like I said, these little sort of, pencil outlines for Super 8 films, but never had I written anything, beginning, middle, and end. And I'm like, well, no. And he said, I strongly urge you to do that, which I took to mean either I had done really well as a writer and he saw promise, or I was such a bad actor that he thought, let's throw this guy a bone or whatever. Yeah. But it was about the time that Sid Field came out with his first book. I can't remember the name of it now. But it was sort of the seminal first book every scriptwriter would read. And I read it and I'm like, wow. He's talking about paradigms, which I don't think I pronounced even correctly. But it sort of put it all into some sort of structural format that I'm like, I could do this. And so I took one of my Super 8 scripts, which is not to say any script at all, but I turned it into a feature. And it was like so much fun because you got to paint pictures and you got to tell a story. And I loved movies. I mean, I was crazy about movies. I just was going to be an animator or an actor or whatever. And so that's when I really thought, I'll be a screenwriter, But then my mom weighed in and said, well, but you probably want a job that's going to bring in some cash. And she suggested advertising. And I'm like, well, that's good. And there is a school of advertising at the university. And so I enrolled in that. And so I just kept writing while I was taking classes in the journalism school. And I thought, okay, fine, I don't need to graduate from the University of Minnesota. And ended up going for 1 year to USC, trying to get in the film school there. I met people in the pre-film school curriculum. I took a couple of prereq classes, never in the film school. It was cheaper then, but still it was not affordable for me to stay. Returned to Minnesota and finished with a degree at the University of Minnesota in communications, which happened to have an emphasis in television production. Never once did I stop writing stuff at home, because I always had certain ideas and stuff. And this is an important lesson because, I kept my eye on the ball. I didn't want to be a director per se. I didn't want to be, I wanted to write. And about that time, I met my wife, the woman that was going to be my wife. And at that time, I think I had graduated or was about to graduate. And I was doing stand-up comedy. I was doing my writing. I was in a band. I was like all these things. And she said, have you ever thought about focusing on one thing? And I'm like, and she had worked as an occupational therapist. And I worked in advertising as an art director. We had no kids. We ended up buying a house. And we would like have our dinner and we'd watch TV and we'd hang out. And then she'd go to sleep and I would write my scripts every night. And I just kept going. And that happened for about 6 years. I compiled about 10 screenplays the whole time trying to sell them from Minneapolis. A writer for the then popular Moonlighting TV series was giving a seminar and it was $15. I'm like, I can afford $15 in an afternoon. And I went, I saw this guy and he pretty much said, write what you know, write what you love. He was very inspiring. And he happened to mention he was writing, he was like a high up executive on an Italian production that was going to shoot in the United States, starring an actor named Terrence Hill, who was the star of early 70s spaghetti Western comedies. And it's called Lucky Luke, based on a comic book. And I'm like, this sounds like the perfect thing for me. I loved Terrence Hill. I loved comedies because I was all about comedy back then. And comic books, and this is great. So I contacted him. He goes, well, write some pitches. And so I wrote some pitches. They liked one. They had me write a spec. They loved it. They bought it. I made, in the sale of that one script, a nominal fee, but it was as much as I made it at the advertising agency that year.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, this is great. I don't have to move to Los Angeles. I can be in Minneapolis. They'd let me into the Writers Guild. I'm like, well, that's certainly got to count for something. That'll open doors in Hollywood. I knew nothing. And so I continued working day jobs in advertising. Doors did not open miraculously from Minneapolis, even though I had a Lucky Luke script, doing okay, but I was not happy. And my wife then suggested we move to LA, but I didn't know anybody when we arrived here. I had no agent. The one rule we had was I was not going to get a job. I was going to write spec scripts all day long. We're going to do this for 1 year. And if we don't succeed, we're going back to Minnesota. And I'm like, oh, come on, you got to be realistic. A year? No one succeeds in a year.
Yeah. And
she said, well, I said, give us 2 years, which is equally realistic, but twice as long as 1 year, And because I really, really wanted to succeed. But what made it possible is that she went off every day. She'd leave in the morning at 7 a.m. I would sit at the computer, taking half an hour off at lunch to watch a Gilligan's Island rerun, and then back to it. And the rule was when she came home at 5, I was done writing, which was fine because I'd been writing all day long. And I wrote Roseanne. There was a show called Doctor, all sitcoms. And I'm like, and in the meantime, I got an agent because of my features.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like, so you were shopping your features around?
This is actually a very good point you bring up, Greg, because this is how I still suggest people do this. It's so much harder. You go in and you break every rule possible to try to get to where you need to be. At that time, getting an agent was your foot in the door, because they had the connections. You couldn't call, shows and whatever. You were not supposed to because, there's rules for that. And there are also rules with the Writers Guild. They had a list of available agents saying these agents accept unsolicited material. These do not, because they have to come through an attorney. And there were all these rules. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I got a 2-year limit here. I can't follow rules. And I would just cold mail every agent on this list of the Writers Guild.
Wow.
And then I would follow up with a telephone call. Hi, it's Jeff Vlaming. I sent a letter last week. And, most of them were like, no thanks, ding. No unsolicited material, ding, And then finally got this one guy who said, send me your scripts. And I sent him a couple scripts, and he goes, these are really good writing. And so he hired me with my features. And I said, well, I'm also delving into television. He's like, well, I'm only features. But, good for you. About that time, Northern Exposure had come back on the air for like a mid-season, half season. And that show really spoke to me, partially because it was very funny, but also it took place in Alaska, and I'm, Minnesota, arguably is pretty close to Alaska. I'm like, I wonder if I could write a spec for them. But every book I read said, don't write a spec for a show you want to work on. And again, I'm like, well, I got some good ideas, and there's nothing to lose. And so I wrote a spec, Northern Exposure, for Northern Exposure. And in the meantime, one of the books I had, and I can't really tell you which one, but I will tell you that they were completely wrong, is they said, watch the credits of a TV series you're interested in. And the person that's listed as story editor is the person that takes submissions.
Oh, you're kidding.
And it was completely wrong. I mean, it's not anywhere close to truth.
How could they even write that?
Oh, I know. It's just like, it was almost like someone was making it up. It was like, story editor. That sounds like someone who would take phone calls. And anyway, but I did it. I followed the rule, and followed that guy's rule. And the story editor at that time was a guy named Henry Brumell, who actually went on to, do some fantastic, amazing work. So ring, Northern Exposure offices. And I said, can I speak with Henry Brumell? And it's just a minute. I'm like, this is great. Hello, this is Henry. Henry, you don't know me, and I explained my whole thing about how I'm writing a spec script. I'm not supposed to do that because no, you're really not, because they have this whole lawyer thing and they're worrying about you being sued. And I'm like, no, understandably. And I said, but I think this is really, I'll tell you what, he said, just send it to my attention at the offices here, and I'll see if I can get it under the wire. And I'm like, oh, great, that's so fantastic. And put it in an envelope, mailed it off. And about 6 months later.
6 months?
6 months later.
Wow.
I get a phone call from Andy Schneider and Diane Frolov, who were the showrunners of Northern Exposure. Yeah. Anyway, they said, we read your spec, and we really can't use the ideas that are in it, but it's really well written, and you really have an ear for the show. And so if you could pitch us some ideas, in just a few weeks, we'd love to hear them. Wow. I called my agent and said, guess what? And he's like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, still, no, the guy's not interested. and then he said, all right, well, I said, well, I thought it was something. And he hung up. And then he called me back 10 minutes later and goes, I'm sorry, evidently that's a huge thing. They called you. And so then he was excited. And they have a TV division at the agency. And so now we're on it. And I sat down and I thought, I got to come up with some ideas. And so it was the hardest I ever worked in coming up with ideas. I came up, stream of consciousness, 100 ideas.
Oh, my goodness.
And I printed them all out, and I read them to my wife out loud. And so she would go, oh, that's good. Oh, that's very good. Oh, that's stupid. That's really stupid. So it's like RS, S, good. And I worked it down to 9 ideas because each episode had 3 plot lines. So it's like, here are 3 sample episodes. And they liked, which is kind of funny, they liked one idea from this episode, one idea and they said, look, do this as a potential episode. But it was essentially a work for hire. And I'm like, okay. And I did. And they said, this is fantastic. We could have you do another one, or we could bring you on staff. And this was about because he was about the same amount of money.
Yeah.
And this happened about a year after we arrived in Los Angeles, which
Wow.
It's all thanks to my wife in allowing me to work full time every day, pursuing relentlessly all of this stuff. And she continued working as an occupational therapist. We still didn't have kids. And in case the bottom fell out from that point, that was my first job. And I was working with such luminaries as Andy and Diane, who went on to do great stuff, working on The Sopranos and many other shows. Jeff Melvoin, who's been a fantastic showrunner, and and who else was on there? Robin Green and Mitch Burgess, all of it. They went on and created again many things. I'm sure I'm forgetting, but Blue Bloods is currently on the air, and it was like going from high school to graduate school. These guys were so amazingly, they're hugely funny, enormously well read, and it was just I couldn't have gotten a better first job if I wanted to. It was just remarkable. It was not a sitcom, and I found that I really worked well with Hour Long. I think largely because I'd begun doing features, and that was well, now television is much more long form and not 27 minutes of jokes and joke trees and whatever. And so I had employment within a very, very, very short time, and I didn't have to work as a barista, and I didn't have to sit there and wait tables, and then like every other individual is forced to, because they have to, because that's usually the case. Right at night when you're dog tired and and you're itching for money. So that was our amazing first year in Los Angeles.
Well, and I mean, at the same time, it was kind of the overnight success that took 10 years.
Right. That's a very good point.
Because you arrived in LA, but I mean, the fact that you had 10 features written, it sounds like you had close to 10, or at least during that time.
Right.
TV spec scripts. I think there's a lot of people who are like working so hard on that one screenplay, and they don't move on and write new material all the time. When you went in, I remember hearing an interview with Stephen Cannell where he went into pitch situations with 15 or 20 fully fleshed out pitches. It sounds like you have that same kind of work ethic, that you really push yourself, not just to 1, 2, 3, 5 ideas, but you just keep on generating ideas. And I think that's really. I read a book, The Executive Chair by Kelly Edwards recently, and her thing is just, if you work hard like that, eventually you are going to make it. Because you can't possibly be generating that much writing and not find a place somewhere who's going to hire you.
That she makes a very good point, and you bring up a good point. You write a script, you finish it, you send it out to wherever you're sending it out. You're already working on the next one, and the person that's going, okay, I've done that. All right, let's see what happens now. It's like you can't do that, because if you want to succeed in something, you don't slow down, you keep pursuing it. And if you hit a hurdle or multiple hurdles, you just keep going. And if you don't have the wherewithal to keep going in that direction, maybe that's not for you. But all the people I've worked with in the business, they are past that point, because they realize that. And so it's a good way to sort of, cut, the wheat from the chaff, as they say, in the Midwest.
Yeah. Another farming analogy I love is that the more seeds you plant, the more chance that you're going to get fruit.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. So my 1 year there on staff, I think I wrote 3 scripts, and then there was it was really great. And then there were 3, and then I rewrote a freelance one that was great. It turned out really well, but they said, we'd like you to do a pass on this, and so they really which was smart. They used their staff writers really very effectively. What I did not realize is that at that time, the previous season, the initial season of Northern Exposure, David Chase had been on the show, and Barbara Hall had been on the show. Both of them had gone off to do their own respective series. They both came back to the Northern Exposure fold, and there was no room for me, which for the last man hired, a first guy to go, which is fine. And I'd had nothing but fantastic experience, but I'm like, suddenly I was out of work, and I'm going, what? I thought, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I'm like, wait a minute. So don't get too confident. Don't start spending that money, because it may not be lasting.
Yeah.
And so this segued to my next job on Weird Science, which was the first USA live action sitcom, USA Network. And the guys that ran the show it was their first job running a show. But I met them at a Writers Guild craft conference, which was open to anybody and everybody in the Writers Guild. So membership did have its advantages. And I met these guys, and they hadn't started the series yet. But when they did, they called me up and said, "Hey, you want to work on this show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." And so I ended up writing like 13 episodes over a couple of years on Weird Science, and it was great fun. And we were sort of breaking boundaries. Because USA was sort of nascent network. They sort of let us get away with crazy stuff. We shot at the Universal lot, so I got to work on a lot, and so that was a great experience.
And was Alan Cross there at that time?
Yes, of course. Yeah. I should have mentioned him by name. Yeah, Alan Cross and his then writing partner, Tom Spezialy. Again, they'd worked on a couple different shows, and very funny guys and great writers and great showrunners. And they really had carte blanche. They would do whatever they wanted with storylines and stuff. So we really got to be adventuresome. And if I may say so, the series is much better than the movie. I know it's John Hughes, much revered, and he did some great stuff. Weird Science, the feature film, was not one of the greats, and not like this show. The show was really good, but X-Files was on the air, and they're going, I really dig this show. It sort of speaks to me. It was in the second season. No one was watching it really, but that was, Fox was this brand new network, netlit, whatever they called it. It was like Married with Children and X-Files, and I don't think Simpsons had even started yet. So they were happy to hang on to X-Files, even if it wasn't getting ratings. It had a fan base. And I was part of that fan base. And so I thought, I wonder if I'm not going to write a spec script for that because I was busy at Weird Science. But I wonder if I can sort of get the ear of Chris Carter, who had created the show. So I'm like, what do I have that's different? How can I present myself in a different way? And so I called, I spoke to his assistant, and I talked to her, and it sort of struck up a relationship. And this is an important lesson I learned early on, is that you're nice to the person who would you like a water before your meeting. Just be nice to everyone, because eventually the person who got you water may be running a show. And it might be years and years later, but people remember, people who are nice, and it also is nice to be nice, so and that behooves you in every job. So this is a lesson for everybody. But anyway, I got, on talking terms with her, and we talked about different shows we liked and all that stuff. And I said, well, I'm thinking I'm going to leave. I have a leave behind for Chris. And I explained, in the advertising business, you leave behind something to sort of reinforce your idea or to, further. And she says, okay. And so I ran it by her, and she thought that was kosher. And this is pre 9/11, understand. So she said, yeah, just bring it by the lot, and I'll give you a drive on, and you can drop it off at our offices. And I'm like, okay. So what I had is this great idea that I had to deliver. I couldn't just put it in the mail because it was this 3D thing. So in a box. So I went over to Fox, left it with the assistant. Everything was great. So Chris Carter, that presumed day later or whatever, comes, and there's a box on his desk, and it's about I don't know if you can see my hands here in front of me, but it's maybe like I don't know, the size of a, I don't know, about that tall.
Like
And
1 foot cube.
yeah, by 1 by 2, or maybe rectangular. And and he takes the box out of the box. There's an object. It happened to be a pickle jar, like one of those
Uh-huh.
resealable things. But if you look at the top, the lid would be about that big around, about this.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the pickle jar is covered with a paper bag, and rather than describe it visually, I for one of my classes I taught, I drew this actually out, and so it looked. I don't know if you can see this. Here, let me bring it up on the camera. Can you read that at all?
Yeah. My God, Mulder is trying to communicate.
Okay, so it's just a brown paper bag written
Yeah.
in the X-Files font. And it's like, my God, yeah. And you just said, my God, Mulder, it said, is trying to communicate. And it's like, well, okay, hopefully with curiosity piqued, he pulls the paper bag up off it in this pickle jar. Inside this pickle jar, I had sculpted from an auto sponge, like the you clean your car,
Yeah.
those big rectangular sponges. I sculpted with scissors and an X-Acto knife an alien embryo. Had little ping pong ball eyes, black of course, and it held a little sign. This alien embryo, and it said Jeff Vlaming is ready to pitch ideas, and it had my phone number.
Uh-huh.
Put it in the jar. But what was great, and this was unanticipated, I filled the jar with water. So the sponge alien embryo, which is, also went and filled the whole jar. And it looked so cool, if I do say so myself. And it was like orange, it was an orange sponge and everything. So I was like, okay, so he opens it up, says he's trying to communicate. Jeff Fleming is ready to pitch ideas. And so I was very proud of that. I dropped it off, called my agent, same agent, and he's like, was it? Yeah, it was the same agent. It was a TV agent at that time.
Yeah.
Different guy than my initial. And I said, I left it behind. These can be very effective if received properly. And my agent's like, Chris Carter doesn't even return executive phone calls. I mean,
Wow.
It's like, so in other words, don't get excited. I'm like,
Yeah.
I won't, but revel in this moment with me, agent. I mean, come on.
The old-fashioned chutzpah.
Yeah, it's all right. We can do it. Anyway, like 4 days later, Chris Carter's office calls. Chris was quite impressed with what you dropped off. Can you come in and pitch ideas? I'm like, oh, yes, you sure? I can. And I hung up and turned to my wife and go, I've got to come up with ideas. I mean, I had been under the impression that this would happen maybe a month down the road or longer.
Yeah.
And I went, I came up with a bunch of ideas. It was nice because, they didn't have to be big ideas. They had to be more concepts. And the series, if you've ever seen it, it's all about the teaser. So you come up with a killer teaser, and then the episodes about this and that. And so I came up with a bunch, went in, and I sat down in his office. It was a pleasure to meet him. And, the pitches went well. A lot of pitches, this is just warning to anybody and everyone who does pitches. And this is across the board. A lot of your pitches, you're like, are they hearing what I'm saying? People just look at you, sort of stare, or they'll go, and they'll glance over their phone, or Anyway, Chris was a pleasure to pitch. He would lean forward and go, like he couldn't wait to hear the next thing, and that was such a pleasure. But what did my heart good is there in the center of his desk, as I'm pitching to him, was this thing I'd sent him, facing to whoever was sitting across from his desk. Yeah.
Wow.
So, he was impressive with it, and you have a good writing, credentials. You're a sculptor as well. I'm like, well, and I explained the advertising background and stuff. But that was the one and only time where it really, really behooved me in getting a job by just applying what makes me different without being ostentatious or obnoxious, to words, in trying to separate myself, from every other writer who was, sitting across that desk from him, But they said, I would like you to be on staff for season 3.
Wow.
And then I had to talk to, it wasn't on the phone, we were in the offices at Weird Science. I talked to Alan Cross and Tom Speziale, and I explained the whole thing and how much fun I'd worked with him. and they said this is a fantastic opportunity. You should
Wow.
definitely. I mean, and they let me go. You know, they let me do like one or two more episodes of Weird Science, because at that point, you know, they were doing really well, and they were sort of coming to the end of the series, and
Hmm.
it was with their blessing that I went off to X-Files and joined
Wow.
that for season 3.
And how long you
So
were on X-Files?
I was there only for 1 year,
Hmm.
and it was not because I didn't turn out some really good episodes. We had a good, large writing staff, and in
Hmm.
fact, that was the year that Vince Gilligan left Virginia from his feature writing career to join the staff, and so
Wow.
some really, really great staff members. And my episodes turned out well. But it was the year my wife and I finally had a kid, and so
Mm.
we were the show. If you're at all familiar with the geography of LA, was at 20th Century Fox. We're in Pasadena. My wife literally broke pregnant, so she wasn't working at that point anymore,
Mm.
and we had a newborn baby. And I just like I started had to split my time, and it wasn't working very well with X Files, and so ultimately, I just as great a job as it was, and as well as I was doing there, I sort of had to make a choice because this group was very much a work late into the night, have
Mm.
some scotch, maybe smoke some cigars, and I just like I first I didn't drink scotch, and I didn't smoke cigars, but I mean I'm happy to be part of the team and want to be part of the team, but I was a brand new dad, and that was the most
Mm.
important thing right then, and so it was a bit of a drag, but it was such a notch in my in my career belt at that point that
Yeah.
I didn't regret it for one instant. But I was only there for only 1 year. But I worked with such luminaries. I may apologize if I've used that word already, but it was Vince Gilligan, certainly that guy,
Mm.
brilliant guy, and so amazingly humble and so talented. And Darren Morgan, who actually won an Emmy Award that year for
Wow.
that season on the X Files, an episode called starring Peter Boyle,
Mm.
and for best Emmy for best writing.
At that point, you had a pretty decent resume. I
Yeah.
mean, Northern Exposure, Weird Science, and X-Files, all pretty well-known series in three very different
Yes.
genres. And so, tell me about sort of armed with that. The next few years, you did a little bit of Lois and Clark, Rescue 77, NCIS, Touching Evil. But tell me about that sort of time.
Well, it was after X Files, I went right to Lois and Clark because I was represented by at that time ICM agency, and what I didn't realize is that what they would do is they would package because I was again I here's the thing, Gray. It's kind of funny. I for the first half of my career was always of the mind that we're all together to put on the best TV show possible. It's going to be the coolest and the greatest business.
Yeah.
This isn't really a business, is it? It's all about creating great content, and of course, it's a business.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I'm at Lois and Clark, and again, I worked with Tim Minear, who's a fantastic,
Mm.
fantastic writer, and really a wonderful guy, but a brilliant writer. And so I hooked up with him as just a fellow staff writer on Lois and Clark. But I never would have met him had it not been the fact that we were all ICM clients.
Mm.
And so they said, okay, we can get one more ICM client. He's free from X Files, so let's put him on there. And it was as much as I liked superhero shows and everything, it was sort of long in the tooth at that point,
Mm.
relatively speaking. And so I was sort of the new guy there. And they're like, well, they've just got engaged, Lois and Clark, and we're going to be around for a good long time. And in fact, ABC like cut their
Yeah.
order mid-season, and that was the final season. So then,
Wow.
we ended up starting there, and then went our separate ways. So that's how I ended up on that show, because I just hadn't watched the show. But
Mm.
for the most part, shows I pursued and shows I stuck with were shows that I watched and would want
Mm.
to watch, and that's always kind of a good rule if you can afford to do that. I mean, that's sort of like good if you can do that. But I mean, most of the people they'll work just to work, And at that point, and so then I was done with that, and then it was a matter of time where it's like I'm not sure nothing was happening, and it was sort of this dearth of work until Rescue 77 came along, and again, that was something that my agents I think got me, and it was a firefighter show for it was not CW then, it was the WB. But it's shot in Los Angeles, and it was created by the guy who created Backdraft. He's a feature writer. And he was a great guy, Greg Wyden. Never had done television before. So you're in there sort of going, okay, well, you usually take about like a week or maybe 2 weeks to write a script. What? 2 weeks? I mean, he's like, no, yeah, because he was used to writing features where you take a month or whatever. It's like, no. Yeah. And I always felt kind of weird because he's the guy who created the show, ran the show, but I was the guy going like, I mean, there was a showrunner. He had plenty of, Kevin Arkadai was running this show, but I mean, I was sort of with Kevin going, no, we have a schedule to stick to in television. And, Greg's like, the feature guy's like, really? Well, I guess, okay. So we served purposes there, that I had not served on other shows, but we shot in LA at an abandoned fire station in Glendale. We had fire trucks in there. It was so cool. My kid at that point was a couple of years older and loved firefighters. So I had the best job in the world. I took him to the set. Anyway, so that was great. But again, CW, not CW, WB. WB. And it didn't last long because, for whatever reasons, I don't know why. And then so these things all sort of, it wasn't my failures there as much as that was a sort of a lesson in stuff doesn't last. Stuff doesn't stick to the wall like spaghetti necessarily. And what was interesting though, and this is a good time to interject here, is each one had a very different writer's room in that Andy and Diane, Northern Exposure, I would meet with them and I would pitch ideas just to them. And then they would say, we like this, we don't like that, we like this, we don't like that. And so that I'd be sent off to my office. And then we'd have lunch together and we'd sort of talk about stuff. But then everyone would go off to their respective offices. Weird Science, sitcom room, a lot of the guys were sitcom writers. And so it was very much a sitcom room where you would sit in the room and you'd pitch out an idea. And then when someone had an idea, they'd say, be assigned it, or they'd say, I'll do this one. And that person would drop out of the room. Well, the room would keep going with coming up. And it was lots of, who can top each other's jokes and stuff like that. And that was really fun, very different, ultimately completely different than other shows. But that was a sitcom room. And, but good to arm myself with that in case I ended up in something like that later. And in fact, I did years later with Tom Spezialy on Reaper, because he co-ran that show many years later, which also segues to you get work from people you work with if it's a good experience. From that point, there was no writer's room in X-Files. We had our own respective offices. Wow. What you would do is you would come up with your idea on a bulletin board with cards. And then when you wanted to pitch it, you pitched to Chris exclusively. Chris Carter would be your audience. Unfortunately, Chris's office was about a block from the writers' offices we were in. So you carry, I mean, in my arms, probably off camera at this point, bulletin boards with cards tacked on with tacks. And you were hoping against hope that it wasn't raining or windy because you had to go a block outside, set up in Chris's office and pitch to him. The writers all were accessible to each other. And so you'd run ideas past them individually or as a group, but there was no room. It was Chris was sort of the here and all opinion on this. And so he'd give you notes and stuff like that, which was good. I think that helped the show stick with his sort of vision, his, univision of the series that I think made it succeed so well. And then again, Lois and Clark, there was more of a writer's room. There was a total writer's room because we were educating the the guy running the show as much as anything on Rescue 77.
Well, let's skip ahead a little bit and talk about you had to be talked into writing for Battlestar Galactica. Tell me about that story.
The slight preface to this is I got a job, and this is the one point where I took a job of the show I didn't watch and wouldn't have watched. NCIS was looking for writers, and Don Belisario, who had created JAG, co-created NCIS with a great, fantastic guy who I'm still buddies with, and it was Don McGill. And so I was hired on NCIS, and as much as I love Don, I'm not a military TV show kind of guy, and this was going to be much more in that vein. But I thought, at that point, I needed a job, and this is network, and network pays well, and so it was Belisario was the showrunner, and he didn't know what the show wanted to be. Here we are. I think they're finishing their 17th season, so it certainly turned out to be phenomenal success. But in that first year, Don Belisario, the co-creator, we all heartily tried to turn that show into something that he just was still trying to get his head around. And one by one, these really good writers all fell by the wayside. I was the last new hire, except for Don McGill, who co-created the show, to be let go. So, I mean, that's how much Don Belisario didn't know the show. So it was just a bad match. I should never have taken it in the first place. But at that time, a guy I had worked with on Keen Eddie, and Keen Eddie got lost in the mix here, but he was Robert Palm, showrunner. He was running a show on USA, which was an American adaptation of Touching Evil, a murder show, serial killer show, starring Jeffrey Donovan. It was fantastic. I was done at NCIS. He said, come work on Touching Evil. Great time. That's the first time I shot in Canada. He's got to, produce all kinds of episodes, got an enormous amount of production experience, enormous. And then that ended abruptly because there was, and again, it's a business. That's right. NBC Universal was bought by, who bought it? Comcast? I can't remember. But it was out with the old, in with the new. And Touching Evil was old. And it was new to them, and they didn't, so it was canceled. And I'm like, oh boy, what's going to happen? And at that time, the guy who had been involved with producing Touching Evil, David Icke, David Icke, great guy. And anyway, his office called and said, would you like to be considered rebooting Battlestar Galactica? And I, Gray, am old enough to remember the original Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, loved it.
Well, I loved it, but I loved Star Wars more. And I'm like, really? We're going to redo? I mean, in retrospect, it was very kitschy and cool, and it was perfect for the time. But it's like, how could you possibly? Why would you do that? So there's got to be something you can offer me more. My agents do that. And then Ike's office, or maybe it was my agents, I don't know who gets the credit, but credit is due. They said, let me just send you the treatment. The guy who's readapting this, rebooting this, Ron Moore, is done. Yeah. I'm like, okay, all right. I mean, just because I liked Ike and I enjoyed so much working on Touching Evil, and I read Ron Moore's treatment. I'm like, this is brilliant. This is I couldn't believe how he, of course, he'd done a bunch of stuff prior to that I was not familiar with. So I should have gone in with my eyes wide open, but I didn't. It was so good and so smart and so, just rethought out. And they took everything that was good, as you said, from the original series, and there was some really cool shit in there. And they reapplied it and made it logical and made it about people and made it all about, if you've noticed, I'm sure the audience, I think it was such an appealing show to such a wide audience because all the women were the smart ones in that. The men were strong and they were fighters and they had names like Apollo. They retained all that, and they were admirals and blah blah. But the smart ones were all the women, and they were just as tough as their male counterparts had been in the original version. Anyway, Ron Moore can do no wrong in my opinion. So did that right, and so I'm like, I read that, I said, okay. I mean, and I'm the first guy to say I was utterly wrong about dragging my feet on this. I would love to be involved.
Mm.
Ron had this big a staff. He had
Wow.
like two science guys that were the uber science guys, and I can't remember her name now. She was a brilliant writer too. Tony, God, I can't remember her last name. Shame on me. But so they had a staff of 3 plus 3. This is prior to the tiny staff norm that's more prevalent now. Anyway, so I was brought on to do a freelance, and the freelance worked out well. They brought me to do another freelance, and then I didn't. Then that was it. That season was done. Came back for another season. I happened to be on the Universal lot just for meeting. Oh, I had lunch meeting with Tom Spezialy, who was running Desperate Housewives. And while I was there, I'm like, I wonder what Ron Moore's up to. So I went to his office, just dropped in to say hi. Literally,
Yeah.
I mean, just to say hi. So funny. I was going to call you. We'd love you to do a freelance for the second season of Battlestar. And I did my 3rd script for them. And
Wow.
man, I'm so proud of being on that show, and just kicking myself for not doing my due diligence to see what a great pedigree it had behind it. But I mean, it was so weird. I never had to be talked into anything, but that was just my old self remembering a 1980s version of something.
Yeah.
And so shame on me again.
Yeah. Well, that show was a case study on how to remake something.
No,
Wow.
you're exactly right. I mean, really, he couldn't have done it. Everything was done so perfectly.
Yeah. And so it was just that 3rd freelance script. Did you do any more work with them?
No. Then by that point, let's see what was I'm trying to think what was the next.
Reaper, was it?
Yeah. That's what happened. Is Reaper came along, and again that was Tom Spezialy. He didn't create the show. That was Michelle Fazekas and Tara Butters. But it was this great premise that was very funny. It's on CW. It's an hour long, but Tom Spezialy was because they'd worked with him a couple of times prior to that. They brought him on to give some credibility because he's also very funny, but a great liaison to the studios and stuff like that. And here was the ultimate lesson on that. The premise was essentially this guy finds out at age 21 when he wakes up one night with the devil in his bed going, okay, Sam, we're going to begin a lovely friendship. And he finds out his parents sold his soul to the devil when he turns 21 so they could have Sam, the son.
Wow.
And he goes, whoa, wait. He goes, well, we wanted a child so badly. And so it's sort of, now the devil has to hire him to catch souls, escape from hell. So it's kind of crazy and irreverent and had a good cast. And anyway, the problem was, this is the other lesson, that this is a business, not a, we're going to make the greatest show ever. And a woman named Dawn Ostroff had been made head of CW Network. And she came aboard with this show, Gossip Girl, and plans to reboot 90210. And because this was going to be the Gossip Girl network, which did not at all, in any way, shape, or form, invite Reaper, which is about these complete layabout guys who, are irresponsible and much more, very sweet and they're very heartfelt and all that. But there was not a match. And she didn't think the show was funny. She didn't think, and she was right. It didn't fit with the other things that were on the network. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to be short-lived just because of that. And that's when there was the writer's strike. And we were like we finished the first season. No, we were halfway through the first season. And then we were brought back to finish the first season. And I thought, okay, well, now we'll see what happens. And then I think necessity brought it back for a second season, which was great because the second season got much more into mythology and became much more serialized. It was serialized to begin with, but the stories were much stronger. We got some really good writers in the second season, and then it just didn't get picked up for a third season, which was too bad. But
the writer's strike was tough on a lot of shows. I remember looking back at that season, and I think there was only 1 or 2 shows from that particular year that ended up surviving.
Yeah.
Like maybe they would make it half a season longer or a season longer, but then almost every one was canceled. That launched around that time.
It was a tumultuous time, and I mean it was very interesting too, and that cemented the business thing is that it was a hard fought 100 days. We were on a picket line, and I've always been a big proponent and supporter of the Writers Guild, but after that I really was a true believer, and in fact it just helped me a lot recently. And it has in 100 different ways. So that's my quick plug. The Writers Guild, I think, has been very good to me, certainly, but to many writers. And so that was a very interesting little hiccup in this trajectory. But a bigger hiccup was coming up about that time. I will interject because I don't want to forget that tail end of this. Remember the William Macy thing that started all of this before I knew I was even going to Los Angeles. William H. Macy, like me, had enjoyed a great ascension in L.A. He about that time, I think it was, he and his writing partner had been nominated for an Emmy Award for a TV movie they did called Door to Door. That starred Bill Macy. Anyway, they got the nomination or they got the award. Anyway, so he hosted a Writers Guild thing, and I said, "Oh my gosh!" And there's open to all the Writers Guild members. It was held downtown LA in a 51-story high-rise building. And I said, Kathy, my wife, I said, we've got to go to this because it's open to everybody. And Macy was going to be there with his wife and, hors d'oeuvres, and he was going to do a little talk. And I'm like, and I can say, hey, and then recount, way back when. And of course, I got there, and of course, I was not the only person who wanted to meet Bill Macy or rub shoulders with him or whatever. So we're enjoying a 51, story lookout over Los Angeles, and I'm looking for a way in, and it just wasn't going to happen. I was realistic. Everyone was trying to bend his ear. This just wasn't going to happen. Kathy and I we go to the elevators, we get in, and it's just us two. The door is closing. I kid you not. A hand stops the elevator, and in comes Bill Macy and his wife. And I'm like, this happens in the movies or in television, but only in bad movies and only in bad television. And he steps in, and so I was like, okay, I got 51 stories. Anyway, so I recounted this thing, and he listened, and he said, I remember that. And so by the time we got to the main floor, there was closure to this amazing thing that had started so inconspicuously and unforeseen. And I'm like, oh man, that never happens, It's sort of like, I could have stopped, I could have retired at that point. It's like, full circle. So that was great. And so I was sort of top of the world. And so Reaper ended. From that I went to Fringe. And then that was pretty interesting in that we had a giant writer's room. Wow. Like way too many cooks. There were 2 showrunners because they brought Joel Wyman on to sort of take over in conjunction with Jeff Pinkner. Because again, their first season, they were sort of trying to do X-Files. They didn't quite know what the show was. They figured it out by the end of the season. But again, Lost was also a bad robot show like this was. They brought some people from that onto our show. And so I was only there for 1 season. I was there though, and it was a great feather in my cap because of Joel Wyman, who created Keen Eddie 5 years before. And so I was really pretty tight with Joel. And so I was happy to be there because of that. And he was a great guy to work with. But I didn't come back from Fringe, and I got a job on Teen Wolf. Okay, so this is where the bottom sort of fell out. And so Teen Wolf was great. I had a fantastic time working with Jeff Davis. I love werewolves. I love my monsters. And we got to sort of create our own mythology. Very
and that's
tiny
another good reboot.
Yes, very good. I mean, Jeff gets all the credit for that. Yeah. But we got some credit too because we got to come up with stuff that's like, what if we would come up with these spiral graves and stuff and he had a very small staff, but no, Jeff, again, really nice
Mm-hmm.
guy, great writer. And we got to, put it in high school and it was a different reboot. I mean, as much as I love Michael, I'm sorry,
Michael J.
movie,
Fox.
Michael J. Fox, yeah,
Yeah.
and everything. This was, let's make it serious. Let's make it,
Mm-hmm.
heartfelt and whatever. And I thought we really, really, particularly that first season, where no one was
Mm-hmm.
turning into lizards yet. But
Mm-hmm.
I knew for a fact, and we all did, there were three writers on it, me and two others. And then
Mm-hmm.
ultimately they were let go, and Jeff pretty much wrote the rest of the episodes. I stayed there for the full season, and I said, I'd very much like to be there because you're guaranteed to be on the staff. I loved your writing. And I said, but I'm not sure if I can pay you.
Not sure if you could pay.
Well, for my level, at my level.
Mm.
And I said, you know what? This has been a fantastic show, and I'd love to see where it goes. So I'd be paid, obviously, but I wouldn't get a promote per my contract or whatever. I said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm negotiable because I really like working with you. He really liked working with me, and so he said, okay, well, you're on board. So we finished up the season. I was visiting Minneapolis at my brother's house on his what became the back patio of Bad News. So I'm on the back patio and I get a call from Jeff going, actually, we're not having the same writing staff, and so you're not coming back. I knew for a fact that there were some people he'd wanted to hire initially before he hired me, so I
Mm-hmm.
understood, but I was still, it's like, oh boy, I'm sort of crushed. And because I thought, well, I was sort of planning having a job in the fall. Suddenly I didn't have a job, and it was really, really very, very weird.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came up, I did a pitch with the Dowdle brothers, who were feature producer director brother team from Minnesota, as a matter of fact. And they had done a couple films. One of them was called Quarantine, this found footage thing. They had a pitch, and they'd never done television. So I came up with this pitch for Legendary TV, and SyFy Network bought it. This is about a year later. Visiting Minnesota on the same back patio, I'm like, I found out it was sold. And then on that same back patio, I found out it wasn't sold. And I'm going, well, wait, is that legal? Can you do that?
Wow.
And it's like, oh, so again, huge disappointment. And about that time, I realized I needed some sort of plan B, because at this point I've had a fantastic career with its ups and downs, but I've learned so much, and I could want for nothing else. But if this writing thing continues not to pan out, I need to do something. At that time, it was getting closer. My older son, was more closer to college. We were touring colleges. I've always loved teaching. I had been over the years sporadically when I had time off, teaching at universities. Really, there's a world that appealed to me. And I thought, well, I'd love to teach. And so I talked to a friend of mine who was, in fact, a university professor or president. He said, you need a master's degree if you're going to teach at college level. And so I went back and I got my master's degree. I was so entranced with going back to the process of going back and getting my master's. It was so eye-opening. I had such a good time. And I'm like, this is definitely something I can do. Markedly different than everything I'd been doing the prior 20 years or whatever. And it'll be a very different lifestyle for my family and all that stuff. But it was something that I was welcome and ready to sort of embrace. And so I was working on that when a very good friend of mine that I'd worked with on another show, and again, these are the people I'd worked with who just throw you a bone or see an opportunity that you think is good. Had started working on a series called Hannibal with Brian Fuller. And this is the third amazing reboot. As good as successful as the movie series was.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so he persuaded Brian to meet with me on Hannibal, and I was hired on Hannibal. So as I was finishing my master's thesis, which was a play, which was kind of fun, writing a play, I was working full time on Hannibal. So I was back in the saddle, and thanks entirely to my friend opening the door. But it was also, again, a nice little moment of closure, because I found out I got the Hannibal job on that very same back patio 2 times. Not once, but twice. fortune had not smiled, and I found out I got a job, and I was back on at least for one more show. And
Yeah.
so the cloud had been lifted. I was,
Yeah.
it was a very, very, I eat in that patio many times since then and have nothing but good memories. So Outcast was immediately after Hannibal, followed by The 100, followed by Debris, which was just last season.
And you did 3 seasons of the 100.
Well, yeah, yes, it wasn't just one of each. Outcast was 2 seasons. It was on Cinemax, and it was created by, based on a series of comics by Robert Kirkman of Walking Dead fame, of course. And then so when that ended, I got a call from Jason Rothenberg at The 100, who'd wanted to hire me before Outcast, and Outcast was being run by my good friend Chris Black, who I'd met years before at Weird Science. And he said, I want you on the show. And I'd like, okay. So I said, I'd let Jason Rothenberg and The 100 down gently, and then worked on Outcast. And then when that was done, Jason called and said, would you like to work on The 100 now? And I'm like, no hurt feelings? Because, I mean, a lot of times people go, fine.
Yeah.
You want to work with me then? You don't get to work with me now. And I came on, and it was a fantastic 3 years working with amazing men and women. Yeah. Mostly largely female staff, which is perfect for The 100. Again, super strong female characters. I mean, really, really a wonderful series.
Julie Shauna Benson were there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Shauna, they're great. I mean, I was so impressed with absolutely everyone I worked with in that show. And very much that was all about the writer's room. I mean, we came up with ideas together. We spent every day in the writer's room together. Jason would join us, but that really, I think that series spoke to the strength of a room, because while we had a room on Debris, that was the COVID year, and so it was all a Zoom room. And as much as we got to know each other, we were all strangers. As someone commented, not in that room, but a fellow writer in another Zoom room said, "You don't know how tall anyone is in a Zoom." Like, okay, I guess for whatever that's worth, but it is true. You don't. It's not the intimate sort of. It was very, very markedly different. You had no alternative. I mean, it wasn't like we had a choice. But so there really was, I think, interesting to compare The 100 and Debris, because I mean they were so abutting, but so markedly different.
And you did teach it at USC for 1 year?
Oh no, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. It's a lot of information here, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach college. So during that time down, there was an opportunity at USC. I applied for a job there, like an actual job there. And of course, Los Angeles, there's lots of writers that, they're looking for, I'm sort of done with this. I'll see if USC can hire me. And there are a lot of people already working at USC, associate professors who are looking for the next step up. So I didn't get that job, but they said, if you want to ever teach a class, absolutely, keep us in mind. So I said, keep me in mind. And so while I was at, I think it was when I was the 100, they contacted me and said, would you like to teach a night class? And I said, absolutely, that'd be great. And irony of ironies, when I was at USC trying to get my foot in the door way back in the 80s, I took the prereq classes. One class that was closest to what I needed to get in, but I did not get in the program, was a 3-hour, 1 night a week class. That was essentially, a night class. And so that's what I ended up teaching more recently, a few years ago at USC. And it was really cool. That went really well. And so then they said, these students love you. You're very effective, and which I've learned now is what it's all about. Is you have to pass muster with the students as much as the faculty and the curriculum and all that. And so I went back and taught a second year, and I was very excited. And it was a great experience. It was so interesting to share, and it was I'm so happy to talk to you and just impart what I can, condensed and quickly here. But here you get these guys for 3 hours once a week. And you can impart all kinds of advice and suggestions, and because they're all looking to embark on their journey. And, I got a lot to share. A lot of it, very different over the 30 years. And it's a very different job getting a new job, different ordeal of getting a new job in 2021, 22 than it was in 1991 and 92,
Let's just segue here into more of an overview
Sure.
of everything. You've caught us up to the present. And I think I mean, I've talked to a lot of writers in this podcast over the years, a lot of them who've been in for several decades, and in your 30-year span, I think it's actually quite remarkable that you had only that one real break. And that was the time that I hear of a lot of writers after sort of about 20 years hitting a break that's like the plane stalling and the plane never recovers.
Right.
So what do you think is the key for you and how you were able to recover, and then really the last 5-6 years have been great?
I think I had a plan B, and then I pursued that. And I think a lot of times people go, "I'm going to have a plan B. I'll teach," and it's like, yeah, but I saw that there had to be a step that I had to do that was every bit as hard as, especially at my age. I mean, it was beneficial in that one kid was in high school and one was about to start college. I think it was beneficial for them to see me, start from scratch and like spending all night writing papers and everything like that. And so there were benefits. As I said, I enjoyed it enormously. I wrote a play, which I'd never done in my whole life, as it was necessary. So there were all kinds of benefits from it. But I had to get that degree because I thought if I did not work in television again, I was prepared to make that break.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to talking about sort of up-and-comers now and how it's different than maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. You're plugged in with a lot of these people who, were students at USC maybe 3-4 years ago. Maybe they're entering the workforce now. We've seen a plethora. There's such a wide breadth of shows now, but it's not necessarily exponential in terms of every level of work.
No,
we
you're
see
right.
staffs that are very small, and sometimes they're very uneven. Say, for instance, you might have a lot of higher level writers and no baby writers,
Right.
or the reverse. So tell me about the current landscape and how that relates to somebody who is at the beginning stages of their career.
Well, what I've seen largely through the 100, because a lot of young writers in there, I mean, staff writers and everything, that are not, like, I started in the business when I was 30. That's because I worked in advertising for all those years prior. Other students at that time would come out of, their curriculum, wherever they were back in the early 90s, and you would get a staff job in your 20s. I mean, just out of college, you didn't have a master's, you didn't have an MFA in screenwriting or anything. You just had an English degree or whatever, and that's because at that time you just needed a good writing sample and an agent that could vouch for you, and sort of an agency that could get behind you. In the 100, there were a lot of staff writers, but they were 30 years old because they had gotten an undergraduate degree in English, then had gone on and got a master's in screenwriting.
Wow.
And then this is, of course, also accruing student debt and having to work, full time, to pay the student debt. And then from that point, this is the question I got a lot. I mean, when I talk to people who are asking about, just how to get into it, just friends, who call and also the students that I've taught at USC, they ask about the internship programs and what kind of internship programs did you have? It's like zero, because that wasn't the part of the equation back then. Because now it seems, and again, using the 100, like the writer's assistant at the 100, the last 2 years, that guy got, after going through, getting his master's, ended up being an assistant at a production company for a couple of years. And then from there, he went to something else. And so by the time he was 30, he was one step below a writer's assistant in the writer's room, where you get to be a fly on the wall. And that's the most coveted. And that's the next step to getting a freelance, And whereas I was a staff writer and I got to write 3 scripts and rewrite a freelance, this guy got one freelance, as he was a writer's assistant. But this guy also was hugely in debt. I had been working for a long time, so he knew way more than I did. I mean, but it's such that also plugs into what you said very early on. By that point, you're kind of jaded, and how could you help but not be? Because I've been working in this business, in this industry, either peripherally or exactly in the business, and it's like this new step ladder leads you up to. By the time you start, you know a lot, and you don't walk in with your eyes wide open and you're like ready to learn. Yeah, really? They've got their own opinions. They've got their own, and rightfully so. They should, but it's a lot of your youthful, and this sounds weird, but I guess I'm old, so I can say youthful exuberance and excitement for them is tapped, is squandered, and so that's why I tell my class, I tell them, I said, go through the internship, try to get an internship that's as close to writing. I mean, if that's all you can get is to work in the mailroom at William Morris Endeavor, something is better than nothing. But that's not entirely. If you want to be a writer, stick to close to writing. Do things that are as close to writing as possible. But try breaking every rule possible, because you got to go and distinguish yourself, because 7 years between graduating your graduate program, saddled with that, it's too long. I mean, it's and again, they're realities, and I recognize that. And you're not living in the 90s anymore, or the late 90s, or even the early 2000s. And so I recognize that. But at the same time, people distinguish themselves, and so keep doing that as well as following these internships and stuff. And so it's sort of, with a heavy heart, I see these people graduating with from film schools and stuff. That's why I think such things as your podcast and everything like that, and every frame painting or whatever. I mean, these things you can glean from a lot of different resources, help you sort of think outside the box, and in that old well-worn phrase, because it has changed a lot.
Yeah, and you had sent in your notes to me, work begets work. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, see, that works on 2 levels. To the business, and in fact, I don't know why, but and I like your explanation that a lot of times it was the 20-year mark of a career. I mean, sort of like, well, that guy's been around the block a few times, in with the old, in with the young and out with the old type of thing. But also, if you don't work for a little while, people go, oh, that person is not working now. And so you're not as attractive. So that's on the business level. But work also begets work, in that you never stop writing. If you like writing, see, here's the thing, Gray, that separates me. I found this out fairly early on. A lot of people get into this business to make the TV shows, to be on set and go, okay, and in the chair, and it's like, oh, thank you for my latte, I mean, just to be part of the, and action kind of thing. I adore writing. I get in the zone when I write. I'd like nothing better than, it's like, okay, Jeff, go home for 2 weeks and write this script. And it's like I'm at home, and it's like, it's so I do it because as much for that as to work in the industry, which has its own benefits. Lots of people do not. So they are the ones that tend to, well, I wrote a screenplay a year ago. Oh, I wrote a spec. And so work, I think, begets work in that it keeps you creatively putting stuff out. And that isn't necessarily to get you your next job, but just sort of keep your brain sharp and to to keep those muscles flexed. I mean, and so it works on a macro level, which is to say, keep busy, take a job, even if you don't want to work on NCIS. Just be seeing that you're employed, but also, to just write at home. I mean, write the stuff you want to write, which is more and more, and this is a good thing. People love to read original specs now, and that sort of, which really helps you allow it to be you, which I made an allusion to earlier, and not just, okay, here's my Madman spec, It's like, okay, this is the 37th one of these I've read, type of thing. You're really reading something that reflects the writer. So that's sort of a product, a writing product of yours that serves both macro and the micro, the personal and the business.
How do egos play in? And you've seen a lot of people in the various writing staffs, and you've seen how their careers have gone beside you. How important it is to control your ego.
Everyone in this business has an ego. You sort of have to have an ego to believe that you're going to be able to make it in this business. It helps them to turn out good product and be proud of that product. Ultimately, the proof is in the pudding that other people will read that and go, this is good. Because it's easy enough for you to go, I thought it was good, thank you very much. But someone else will be your judge ultimately on that. But you need the ego to keep going, because so you need, it's an interesting bag. But once you're in a room, it's the guy who sort of drives you crazy on the first day of the writer's room, where you're going, I'm going to hate this guy or this woman. Sometimes you're woefully incorrect and they turn out to be really funny. And so it was like first day jitters for them or whatever. But often that's not the case. And I mentioned, the Fringe room was enormous, and there's no reason to cite any names or anything. But the first day I was there, I didn't know anyone in the writers' room except Joel Wyman, and so he's sort of sizing everybody up, but then Joel Wyman and Jeff Pinker, a stranger, they say, okay, well, we got to go, put out some fires or whatever. So we're left with all these writers, and you're trying to figure out who's in charge here. And the one guy who's clearly took over the room was clearly not in charge. But it's like, okay, so then you're like, okay, he's in charge, and then you find out it's not, and you go, this guy just has an enormous ego, and and I don't know that I was the only one who was sort of put out by him, and then so everything is from that point is sort of tainted. And again, I mentioned this. Just be nice to everyone. But some people that come in with a big ego, and that's going to certainly, I think, be picked up on by your boss. A lot of times your bosses have big egos, but they've sort of earned it, and it's their baby, and you got to, you as a writer and an understaffed person, you have to recognize that and respect that, and so because you're not peers, and so there's this hierarchy that you have to learn, but so the only ego you keep in check is your own. And if you're super egotistically, you're not going to get very far in this business. So like I said, most everyone I worked with either ultimately fail by the time you check in on them next, or they don't get very far at all, because this is largely a bigger room, a small room, even though they're getting smaller. The back to the farm, wheat is cut from the chaff, and I think the most capable and the people who are the easiest and most valuable to work with are the ones that remain. But you have to get there, and keeping your ego, if you have one, in check, or just be aware of it, is very, very important.
Yeah. What I really wanted to end up with is, if you were to speak to a high school student, right. And in other words, somebody who has an absolutely, completely blank canvas ahead of them, but they want to be a TV writer, what advice would you give them? What do you think is the best way to aim themselves to a TV writing career right now in 2021?
It's all about the writing. It's all about coming up with stories and telling stories that you want to hear and that you want to help resolve and see if you can do that, because it's not so easy. Get off your device, come on. Television is different than it was 5 years ago, as you pointed out. Certainly different than it was 10 years prior to that, and in 10 years before that. It's changing in such a way that people, it's sort of hard to predict. But what's still at the core of all this is telling good stories. I mean, just finished watching Squid Game, and it's like that could easily have been nothing but the first episode. If you're not familiar with this, the first episode times 9 episodes. And it wasn't. It was so much about so much more that spoke of a knowledge of society, of cultural societies, of all these things. It blows you away. That you begin with a hook. Every show does. It always has. But it isn't just that X-Files hook from 1992. It isn't like it says something, and it is because you can tell serialized storytelling. You can tell a larger story than it was in a Matlock episode, where it's like beginning, middle, and end was, we caught the killer red-handed, and he's guilty, Your Honor. Okay, next episode. So in that respect, that's a result, I think, of the writers and group of writers having a really, I think, a broad education, be aware of the world around them, and not just what can I do to become a successful TV writer.
Very cool. And you mentioned a couple of times about being saddled with debt. Do you think it's a mistake to get an MFA?
Yes and no. You get to rub shoulders with with MFA program, and everyone. I've talked to a bunch of different people actually in the recent months, at different varying levels. Some are at USC. One is at Loyola Marymount here in LA. Another is at the LA Film School, which is more of you learn all the nuts and bolts of filmmaking. One of the things being screenwriting, and they all have their merit, and so the bottom line in all of those is that you rub shoulders and deal with people who are like-minded and will be an asset past that. But I mean, some people have parents that can pay for this stuff. Other people, it's like, I don't know, I don't know. See, that was not a concern for me. And I wonder, with the example of our writer's assistant, if that was money well spent, considering how much it's going to take. Someone goes, if you get a good job, then you're out of the debt. Like, maybe, but so it's a very hard question to answer. And I'm not sure that, teaching at USC, the answer is, of course you want to get the education. Don't watch, things you can see on YouTube and listen to podcasts, But those things, I think, are every bit invaluable as the education that you pay for, unless it's not, going to break your bank, because that has become such a consideration now too. So that's a very hard question to answer, and I'm not sure that I answered that really well at all.
Yeah. Well, I think it just speaks to the fact that there's not one preordained path into the industry for every person. There's so many different ways that a person could come in.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
And there's different learning styles. Yeah, there's different learning styles. Some are self-taught, and some are not.
It's different for everyone. And I was fortunate enough to have opportunities, and certainly for my wife, but by the time I entered the business, all those things that people can't take advantage of necessarily, if at all, or timing at this time in the business's history, are not affording them, But that's why I guess I come back to stay true to your passions, and you will say, I'm going to make it, and you will make it. I mean, but you have to sort of believe in yourself, and then that will make it that much easier to overcome any financial or whatever considerations that you're going to encounter.
Well, you know what? I think that there's been some really, really helpful lessons today. I think thinking about your path through the industry, some things that are very clear. Number one, write. Keep writing.
Absolutely.
keep learning. And number 2, get to LA as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And don't take no for an answer. Be aggressive. And to your story about, I know there's this prevailing wisdom that you should never write a spec script for the show that you want to be writing on. And yet at the same time, every exception that I've heard as I interview people has always been successful. So
Yeah.
I guess there are times you can break the rules.
That's a great way to sum up everything I was saying.
Yeah. Very cool. And be nice to people because they could be your boss 5 or 10 years from now.
Right. And just it's also nice to be nice to people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Well, we'll wrap things up here. You're J Vlaming writer on Twitter.
Yeah, that's my handle. I put a lot of drawings and things that have nothing to do with television, but a lot of stuff does have to do with my TV career and thoughts on TV.
Very cool. Well, I can't wait to hear about your upcoming projects, and thanks so much for all the wisdom that you've shared today. Best of luck to you.
All right, thanks. The pleasure's been mine, Greg.
avgearguide.com, a member of the Association of Moving Image Archivists, specializes in film and video restoration. We use state-of-the-art technology to bring new life to vintage material, like the Lost Betty White series Pet Set, which we recently restored for its 50th anniversary return to air. We can apply the same technology to your documentary, film and video archive, and your family videos and photos. Mention the name of the TV Writer Podcast and get 10% off your order. And if you want to make some money, we also give cash for referrals. Visit avgearguide.com for details.
DrivingFootage.com provides 4K 9-angle driving plates for film and television. Over 14,000 clips are available for locations all around Southern California, with more areas coming soon. A fully equipped camera car with height-adjustable rig is available for custom shoots and second-unit photography. Visit DrivingFootage.com for details. Full disclosure, I do own both of these companies. By supporting them, you help me bring new in-person video interviews to you. Make sure to subscribe on all of the places you can find this podcast: Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, the TVWriterPodcast.com site, or also at scriptmag.com, and now also on Pandora. And if you're on Instagram, please follow at TV Writer Podcast. Please do follow me on Twitter. At Gray Jones is my handle. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do it for as little as 25 cents per episode. You can find out how you can become a patron of the podcast or a sponsor of the podcast at tvwriterpodcast.com/support.